Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to peel back the curtain on how central banks try to steer our economy. It looks like they have a pretty simple set of tools, right? But what we're going to find is that these tools are being used in a financial world that holds a really surprising and honestly fascinating mystery right at its heart. Okay, so let's just dive right into this. You hear it on the news all the time, right? The Fed or some other central bank raised rates and the markets go wild. But what does that even mean? I mean, how do they actually do it? How does a decision made in some fancy boardroom translate into what happens with your mortgage or your savings account? So, to get to the bottom of this, we've got to look at the main tools central banks have in their toolbox. You could really think of it as the steering wheel they use to try and guide this massive vehicle that is our financial system. At its heart, it's all about influence. See, central banks don't just snap their fingers and set a rate. They have this really deliberate system that's designed to nudge and guide the rates that banks charge each other for overnight loans. And that whole process of getting their big policy decision to ripple out through the rest of the economy, that's what economists call monetary policy transmission. And this system has a name. It's called the interest rate corridor, or IRC. And it's actually a pretty elegant idea. Basically, the central bank creates a kind of hallway with a ceiling and a floor to stop the market interest rate from swinging around too much. It's almost like bumpers in a bowling lane, just keeping the ball rolling right down the middle where they want it. All right, so let's get a closer look at how this whole framework for controlling interest rates actually works. I mean, it's one thing to talk about a corridor, but it's another thing to see it. It makes the whole concept click. So check this out. What's so cool about this chart is how clearly it lays everything out. You can see the gray lines, right? That's your ceiling and your floor. That's the corridor. The red line in the middle, that's the central bank's target, the official policy rate. And that bouncy dashed black line, that's the actual market rate, just humming along, pretty much contained right inside those bounds. And this just spells out the three key parts perfectly. The ceiling, that's set by the lending facility. I mean, think about it. No bank is going to borrow from another bank at a higher rate than it can get from the central bank itself. And the floor, that's the deposit facility. Again, why would a bank lend to another bank for less than it can get just by parking its money risk-free with the central bank? So you've got this floor and ceiling. And right in the middle, that's the policy rate they're aiming for. Okay, so we've got this nice, orderly tool, the IRC. It's designed to bring some predictability. But here's the thing. It's used to influence a market that is, it's anything but simple. And when we zoom in on government bonds, I'm talking about the bedrock of the entire financial system, a real head-scratcher of a puzzle starts to emerge. So let me just ask you a question. If you wanted the absolute best bang for your buck, the best possible return for the amount of risk you take, should you buy a government bond that matures in, say, 1 year, or one that matures in 30 years? I mean, logic would tell you that tying up your money for way longer is riskier, so you should get paid more for it, right? And yeah, that's exactly what the textbooks say. Financial theory basically predicts that the longer a bond's maturity, the higher the compensation you should get for taking on that extra risk. In finance jargon, they measure this with something called a Sharpe ratio, and the theory says the longer the bond, the higher that Sharpe ratio should be. Simple. And this is a huge but, when researchers actually dug into decades and decades of real-world data from the U.S. Treasury market, they found the complete opposite. It turns out it's often the shorter-term bonds that have given investors a better risk-adjusted return. This find just turns a fundamental assumption of finance completely on its head. So this brings us to this really fascinating direct conflict. It's a clash between what all the elegant models predict and what the messy real-world data actually shows us is happening in the market day in and day out. And here it is side by side. I mean, you can't get any clearer than this. On one side, you have the theory, this neat upward sloping line where longer bonds mean better rewards for the risk you take. And on the other side, reality, a downward sloping line where shorter-term bonds often come out on top. This isn't just a tiny difference, folks. It's a fundamental paradox. And hey, don't just take my word for it. The researchers who documented this, they don't pull any punches. They flat out state that the theoretical prediction sharply contradicts well-known empirical evidence. Now, let me tell you, when you see academics use language like sharply contradicts, you know they've stumbled onto something really, really big. So you might be thinking, okay, that's a weird bond market thing, but why should I care? Is this just some academic trivia? No way. It actually has profound implications for those very tools we started this whole conversation with, the ones central banks are using to steer the economy. So here's where we connect all the dots. For a tool like the interest rate corridor to work well, it kind of relies on the financial system being predictable. But this puzzle shows us that the market can behave in totally counterintuitive ways. If big investors consistently prefer short-term bonds for reasons that go beyond simple risk and reward, that can affect everything from market stability to how central bank policies actually trickle down to the rest of us. It's all connected. And all of this leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought. That simple steering wheel we talked about? Well, it's driving on a very, very complex and sometimes paradoxical road. And as our understanding of these deep market puzzles gets better, it's almost a guarantee that the steering wheels themselves are going to have to evolve too. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.